Good morning, Grace Covenant. I hope you are having a good day so far. It's I'm glad to be getting my devotional out in the morning. Um, Lots of times things get away from me during the day, and I'll get so busy um, doing all kinds of stuff for church and all kinds of meetings and such. So it's good to be spending some time with you this morning, listening to the day be born, the beautiful birds. There's a mist over the mountains. Um, there's a stillness and just a kind of gentle awakening that I feel this morning. It's been about 10 years. It's been exactly 10 years since my first book came out, Let the Bones Dance, Embodiment and the Body of Christ. And I remember how terrified I was when it was coming out because it felt like such an exposure, because that book talked about really some of the most intimate details of my life, things I hadn't really talked about publicly before, things that had been secrets for a long time. And I remember when the publisher, Westminster John Knox, told me, that everything was moving forward, the book was coming out, and we had a date for the release, I really kind of panicked. And I realized that I no longer had that story as my own. Now people were going to take it and do with it what they wanted to, and especially the part about being raped and experience of sexual trauma. I felt afraid. I felt afraid that that there would be some consequences for that. That that this person who did that might get really angry. And I've definitely got triggered by the whole idea of it being exposed. One of the threats that he used against me at the time was, if you tell anybody, they're not going to believe you. And I believed that. So the prospect of it being in print, and me not knowing who read it or who saw it, or people being able to ask questions that were invasive and upsetting, it was hard. And at the time, I knew that the project was it was about healing, and it was about how our bodies hold pain, and how our bodies hold trauma, and how our bodies also hold the capacity for healing. And certainly my healing journey has continued since then, since 2010 when that book came out. And if I had it to do over, I think there is some language that I have now that I would use to deepen and enrich that project, and that would be the language of white supremacy culture. The book does talk about racism and paternalism and the harmful ways that white people, and particularly white Christians, have hurt the world and hurt everybody, hurt ourselves, but particularly hurt people of color and the earth, and hurt our ability to be emotionally vulnerable with one another. But I didn't have a lot of the analysis that the language of white supremacy culture gives us now. and if I did have it to do over, using that analysis, I think would help me be able to talk about some of the cultural patterns that we see around emotional pain. And we've been seeing a lot of that lately. I thought of this particularly when I saw the video of the white couple in California. The woman was painting over Black Lives Matter with black paint, which ironically still, wasn't covering up the message. But, they were very adamant about that this was a myth, racism was a myth, and that this mural wasn't going to be a part of their community. That I think they said something like, you can keep this stuff in New York. And it just struck me that that kind of hostility toward somebody sharing their pain, that is white hostility toward Black lives, saying we're hurting, we need your compassion, we need you to stop hurting us. Seeing that hostile reaction and that just kind of brazenness and callousness really brought up to me that there is a character trait in the kind of list that circulates around white supremacy. There's a character trait that's missing. And that is this hardness, this emotional deadness, this shaming in the face of emotional intimacy and vulnerability, that's a part of white supremacy that is just so deeply harmful. And I realize I can feel the emotion swelling up in me, because that has really impacted my life. That kind of reaction to our emotions. I've always been somebody that really feels things deeply, and I know that's not a surprise to people who know me. And maybe you're one of those people too, who can really feel things. And when you then kind of meet a world that shames you for that, or that that threatens you because of that, or that tries to destroy you because of that, it's a really hard thing to walk around with. And I feel like that's what we're seeing right now from the President of the United States. When I see the footage of him at Mount Rushmore, and again, that whole facade along those black hills is just, it's about this, what I'm talking about, this callousness, this hardness, this brutality around pain that white supremacy culture normalizes and even valorizes. I think about that those black hills were, they were violated in the early 1900s when Mount Rushmore was carved into that hill, those hills that were sacred, sacred to indigenous people. They believed that the faces of their ancestors and grandfathers were there in those mountains. And then for the United States government to come in and say, well, we are going to not only disregard the sacredness of this place, but we are going to take a chisel and cut into that and replace it with these colonizers, with these people who've tried to exterminate you and other indigenous people and have enslaved black and brown people. Again, the depth of hardness of heart that it takes to do something like that is truly devastating to our humanity, to all people's humanity, because it's dehumanizes the perpetrators as well. Um, that's about dehumanizing those on whom this is inflicted, but it also just steals the humanity of those who perpetrate that. And so, as we look at some of this footage today around white hostility toward Black Lives Matter, because really Black Lives Matter is about pain. It's about pain. It's simply a cry to stop killing us, stop hurting us, stop harming us. And to see the kind of white hostility in the face of that, of you're lying, shut up, we're going to hurt you more, we're going to call you a terrorist organization, we're going to tell you you're stupid, we're going to do whatever we can, we're going to pull out all the stops to say that this is not true. We're going to gaslight a nation and tell them that this is a liberal hoax, or that this is a lie, a leftist lie, as the man in California, when they were painting over the Black Lives Matter, said. That is such an emblem of white supremacy. Emotional hardness of heart. A loss of soul. A loss of connection to one's siblings in the human race. A loss of empathy. And also within that, there must be a deep, deep self-loathing. And I know that has been something I've carried around too. And that's something that sexual violence definitely taps into. You hate yourself, you feel ashamed, you think it's your fault. And the world tells you that you're right about that. And again, that's deeply, deeply devastating to one's sense of self, one's ability to feel safe in the world. Because human life is about vulnerability. In the last several years, we've been given a lot more language around the way to talk about shared vulnerability, the way to talk about white supremacy, the way to talk about trauma. These are all things that when I was writing my book were, people were talking about it in certain circles, but it wasn't as broad-based as it is now. And so I'm thankful for how these words and concepts and language have been amplified so that we can collectively have a conversation about it. But my prayer for us, Grace Covenant, my prayer for the world is that not only can we have conversations, but we can actually learn how to be gentle with one another, that we could actually be regenerated as a human race to be compassionate in the face of pain. And I know, sometimes I've preached about these painful experiences. And invariably there is someone, even in Grace Covenant, even in that congregation, who will shame me for preaching about something so personal. They'll tell me that I'm doing it wrong. They'll tell me that preaching isn't therapy. They'll try to really just shame me into stopping doing that. So my message to those folks is, I'm sorry that pain is something that's so triggering for you, because I know that means you must have a lot within you and within your body, and that you have that kind of bristle that comes up when someone is vulnerable before you, when someone shares something so raw. When I needed your gentleness, when I needed your compassion, and you came back at me with hostility and shaming, thank God I have a lot of resources and a lot of people who love me, and I know that God loves me and that Jesus has invited me to be vulnerable with all of you. And thank God I have those resources so that when you said those things, it did hurt, but it didn't penetrate me to the level that it used to. And so I am able to extend some compassion to you and say that I pray that your pain, the pain that feels so unsafe for you to surface, I pray that it will be met with a gentleness. And I pray that you can feel a new sense of being loved, a new sense of being held. Um, and Grace Covenant, I pray that we can practice that kind of abundant compassion. Um, and maybe my next devotional will be about that compassion isn't the same as niceness or avoidance or not holding someone accountable. Compassion is about coming alongside a person with their feelings, with their vulnerability, so that it's safe to have difficult conversations. And I am grateful for this congregation and our ability to be together in difficult conversations and difficult work. And I just really affirm so many of you who have come to me with difficult questions. And those conversations that we've had have been so deeply healing and inspiring and edifying. And I do think they help heal the world when people can get together and be gentle with each other and be honest with one another. And those kind of supportive moments change the world. So may we have more of those. And less of this white hostility and this white brutality toward raw emotion. So prayers for more gentleness today.